You're watching the Daily Climate Show on Sky News. Coming up on today's programme, changing the course of global warming. Scientists show how a future without meat could cut global emissions by 2/3. The gas supply crisis slows Europe's efforts to reduce coal and cut emissions, while renewable energy continues to grow. And a small but vital step to help protect koala populations as the first southern joey to be born in Europe emerges from his mother's pouch. Hello and welcome to the UK's only daily climate news show, where we track the changes happening to our world right now and challenge those coming up with the solutions. Now, scientists searching for ways to cut damaging greenhouse gas emissions fast enough to limit global warming have turned their attention to animal agriculture. One study by experts in California claims veganism holds the answer. They've calculated that by stopping farming animals for food, greenhouse gas emissions would fall by the equivalent of a 68% reduction in carbon dioxide. But could the general public ever be convinced? Our science correspondent Thomas Moore reports.
It's little surprise that scientists behind one of the top vegan food brands want to get rid of all animal agriculture. But plant trees in the empty fields, do it in just 15 years, and you have a radical climate plan taken seriously enough to be published in a peer-reviewed journal. They calculate the combined effect on global warming would be the same as reducing carbon dioxide emissions by 2/3.
I think the results are solid, and I would encourage scientists to look at the results skeptically, but with an open mind, and draw their own conclusions. And I think they'll realize that this is the biggest opportunity to turn back the clock on climate change that we're ever going to have, and we should jump on it.
The scientists from two of America's top universities say the animal industry is responsible for 16% of greenhouse gas emissions. Rewilding the land as forest would remove 800 billion tonnes of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and that would pause rising emissions for 30 years. But other climate scientists say it's far too simplistic.
We need to be addressing fossil fuel use, and we also need to be addressing our diets. But there is a danger that this is kind of, OK, the world can go vegan, we can carry on driving our cars using petrol, which is really very misleading, dangerously so.
The plan would also wind up many carnivores. Meat is still such a big part of the national diet that even the Committee on Climate Change, the government's advisors, say a more realistic target is reducing consumption by 35% by 2050. Is this then steak with less guilt? Claire Hill moves her cattle to fresh grazing every day. The soil stores more carbon, offsetting some of the methane from the cows, and it's better for biodiversity too.
Less meat and better meat in this part of the world, in the Western world. Less and better meat, more and better vegetables has to be a kind of mantra that we start to look to. But vegan only, I am not sure that the exclusion of animals completely from our ecosystem is going to bring the benefits that we need.
But the vegan scientists say animal agriculture takes up 1/3 of the Earth's land area, and that's not sustainable. Thomas Moore, Sky News.
Efforts to reduce the amount of coal power in use have been hampered by the surge in gas prices. New analysis of electricity market data found that increasing levels of renewable energy are being used to replace gas rather than coal in the European Union. And this is putting ambitions to cut emissions and limit global warming to 1.5 degrees at risk. So coal usage in the EU dropped by just 3% in 2019 to 2021, compared to a decline of 29% in the 2 previous years. Use of renewable energy has expanded in Europe in the last 2 years, but while more than half of this additional energy has replaced gas power, only a sixth has replaced coal. And in the UK, solar power generated 3.8% of the overall electricity supply in 2021, less than half the amount of leading EU countries. In Europe, however, solar generation is on the rise, and it's not just in sunny countries. In 2021, nearly 10% of Spain's electricity came from solar energy, and the same is true of the Netherlands, and just over 9% of Germany's power supply came from solar energy. So why is solar power booming across much of the EU, but not in the UK? Well, joining us now is Phil McDonald, the Chief Operating Officer of the think tank Ember, which conducted this study. Phil McDonald, welcome to you. Solar taking off then on the continent. Why is that not the case in the UK?
So yeah, as you mentioned, it really is, it's not to do with how sunny the countries are. It really is to do with a explicit choice by the government. So it's a choice to back it with policy rather than just where the sunshine is. As we're seeing, Netherlands and Germany, very similar countries on a very similar latitude to the UK, are doing extremely well with solar and continuing to grow. And the UK is stuck stagnant at this level, around 4% of power demand. And it really is, it's a government choice.
The UK, however, outperforms many of its European neighbours on wind power. So do we need to focus on solar as we race towards meeting our climate goals?
We're going to need both, and the useful thing about solar is that you can use it very close to where the electricity is being actually used. So the real opportunity is to be putting solar on roofs, and we're seeing this in Germany. The new coalition government has committed to every new build home is going to have solar on the roof, and that makes a huge difference to electricity demand.
Meanwhile, you think that the rise in gas prices would be good news as far as renewables are concerned. You think everyone would move from gas to renewables. So what's actually happening? What's actually going on?
Yeah, so we've seen that there's obviously a global energy price shock happening at the minute, and it's around gas. And we're seeing that instead of renewables for the last decade have been eating into coal and reducing coal, which has been great for the climate, now they're reducing gas instead. And coal is being given a bit of a stay of execution, and that really puts Europe off track for its climate goals, which is a real worry.
Well, yes, and COP26, we saw leaders agree to phase down the use of coal. I mean, coal use is still going down, isn't it? And if gas is coming down as well, how worried should we be?
We should still be worried. We need to have, even these kind of small declines are not good enough to get Europe entirely fossil free. We know that by 2035, we need to be coal and gas free across all of Europe. And this just doesn't put us on that trajectory. These kind of small declines aren't going to get us there. It needs to move much faster. And obviously the way to do that is to deploy much more wind and solar as quickly as possible.
Well, Phil McDonald, thanks very much indeed for your time.
Thank you.
Now for some of the day's other climate news, and it's been revealed that Brazil's environmental agency spent less than half of its budget for climate enforcement last year, despite soaring levels of destruction in the Amazon rainforest. Deforestation in Brazil's Amazon rainforest hit a 15-year high in 2021, clearing an area larger than the US state of Connecticut. Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro has often spoken out against what he calls overzealous enforcement of environmental laws. A mega flash bolt of lightning spanning nearly 500 miles across 3 US states has set the record for the most far-reaching single flash. The lightning occurred in April 2020, extending over 477 miles through Texas, Louisiana and Mississippi. It beat the old 2018 record set in Brazil by almost 40 miles. Sand dunes that were once used as a dumping ground for waste tobacco are to be rejuvenated as a haven for wildlife. Thousands of tonnes of wet tobacco leaf was tipped onto the site in Merseyside, known as Tobacco Cliffs, between the 50s and 70s. The National Trust aims to transform the 2-hectare stretch of land into a refuge for rare animals, including natterjack toads, the UK's loudest amphibians. New research has found that keeping global warming to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels will still be catastrophic for coral reefs. Scientists from the University of Leeds have found more than 90% of tropical coral reefs will suffer frequent and intolerable heat stress, their #1 threat, even under climate warming limits in the Paris Agreement. Over 500 million people's livelihoods and food security rely on coral reefs, Experts claim their survival will require significant and urgent action globally. And a baby southern koala, born at Longleat Safari Park, has emerged from its mother's pouch for the first time. The joey is the first ever southern koala to be born in Europe, a major milestone for the species. Koala numbers in the wild were hit drastically by the devastating bushfires in Australia in 2019, which scientists say was made 30% more likely because of climate change.
The reason behind obviously bringing them all the way from South Australia to here, for a magnitude of reasons. Obviously, we saw those devastating bushfires, obviously just before COVID, obviously through to the genetic diseases they suffer from, and also just in general their genetic pool and diversity lacking. So in general, just overall educating, learning, and hopefully enhancing our knowledge of this amazing species. We found out to start with that we may have something going on around middle of September. From that, we saw a little bit of change in Violet's behaviour. She started distancing herself from the bird and basically lounging around a lot more. We had a little look and hey presto, managed to see a little bit of activity in the pouch. That process from the birth to the getting in the pouch would have been around roughly 30 to 36 days being pregnancy. From that, it's obviously been in the pouch, it's been suckling on Violet, mum's milk, and it's now actually transitioning onto more solid food at around 6 months old. So it's doing very well. It's getting fluffier by the day and is growing from strength to strength. With the growing bushfires becoming more and more prominent, unfortunately, in places like South Australia, where the amazing species are from, sadly are putting more and more pressure on the species, are obviously affecting the population, but also bringing them closer together. And sadly, overall, they are getting affected by this. So climate change is an issue.
We're getting straight to discussing the climate issues of the day now with climate scientist Dr. Ella Gilbert and carbon footprinting expert Mike Berners-Lee. So good evening to both of you. Nice to see you both. So, Veganuary is over with a record-breaking 600,000 people taking part this year. And earlier in the show, we heard about what would happen under a somewhat unlikely scenario. If everyone decided to go vegan and land was returned to its natural state, greenhouse gas emissions could be reduced by nearly 70%. And Mike, this report that's just come out suggests that huge change could be achieved through ditching animal agriculture. So do you think this should become a main priority now as we race to reach our climate targets?
Well, whilst there's still a bit of scientific uncertainty around some of the details of exactly what causes what's absolutely clear-cut is that cutting our meat and dairy by a lot in our diet is going to make a big difference to climate change. Whether 68%, as reported in this, in this paper, is the exact figure, remains slightly unclear. But it's definitely a key driver, and it's not just from a climate perspective. It's also just as importantly from a biodiversity perspective, and also even if you just want to feed the world and provide everybody with access to a healthy, nutritious diet, that also becomes a lot easier if you dramatically reduce the amounts of meat and dairy. So whether we need to absolutely be purist and cut it to zero, I personally don't think I'd advocate that, but deep cuts, I think they're pretty uncontentious now, yeah.
Dr. Ella Gilbert, I think I'm right in saying you are vegan, aren't you? Do you think that everyone else should follow suit like you and cut out meat and dairy altogether?
I am vegan. I have been for about 10 years. But I think the thing I often say to people is that it's not about this binary choice between, eating meat 3 times a day and being completely vegan. It's a spectrum, as Mike was saying. Completely cutting out all animal products overnight is not necessarily something that will go down particularly well or that is necessary. I think it's always about having a balance and saying we know that the climate and environmental impacts of the meat industry and also to an extent of dairy are huge, but it's about kind of phasing out and reducing the amount of consumption that we all have, so that we can have that positive impact on the environment. I don't think it's necessarily as kind of clear cut as saying you have to go vegan tomorrow. I think it's a lot more palatable to lots of people if you give them the choices and you help them to reduce or to transition away from meat and more kind of environmentally damaging products towards a more sustainable alternative.
Well, yes, because, Mike, some people really might not like the idea of being lectured and told how to change something as fundamental as their diet. I mean, do you think that people do hate being told what to do in ways like that when they'll say, but hang on a minute, we've got whole countries that are getting all their power from coal, for example. What difference is it going to make if I give up my burger?
Well, nobody likes being told what to do about anything, but there's plenty of opportunity in this. As you know, we're talking about over a period of time, a cultural change, an educational change. A few decades ago, it used to be that for most people, they could probably become more healthy if they ate more meat and dairy. Actually, that's not the case at the moment. Most people would become more healthy if they ate less meat and dairy. The taste and quality of the non-meat and dairy products that are on the market at the moment, you know, are going up and up and up. So, you know, it's just a question of changing habit a little bit. And I think many of the underlying drivers that used to give status to meat and dairy are no longer relevant. And actually, a lot of people, if they understood more about exactly how most of the meat and dairy that we produce in the world is produced, actually would want less of it. So I think this change is waiting to happen. And I think with the Climate Change Committee's 35% target by 2035, I think they are dramatically under-egging both the opportunity and the need for deeper cuts than that. But it doesn't have to be instant. Okay. And as we've just heard, you know, it doesn't have to be 100%. So there's nothing to be scared about. And most people find, I think, that as they start to change their habits, their preferences change with them as well.
And Ella, what do you think about this conversation happening in richer Western countries like our own? I mean, it's a different matter for some poorer countries, isn't it, to start talking about veganism?
Yeah, it's a matter of choice. And I think in lots of nations where the dominant protein source is less easy to kind of switch to a vegan alternative, I'm thinking of places where there's a heavy reliance on fish, for instance. I think that would be a more challenging thing. And then there's also the kind of climate justice angle where you can talk about, okay, in developed countries, we've got a lot of historical responsibility for driving climate change. Why should we then lump the burden of lifestyle change onto countries who have less historical responsibility? But I think it's kind of a nuanced argument. I think as a global society, we need to make these changes to really accelerate the amount of climate action that we are taking. And absolutely every single thing that we can throw at the problem, we should be. And that includes cutting fossil fuel use, that includes switching to more plant-based diets, and that includes a whole suite of other things that no doubt we will hear about.
OK, let's move on to our next topic, shall we? Because the UK isn't known for its sunshine, but the think tank Ember has argued that the UK could be generating more solar power from this renewable source. And last year, solar power made up twice as much of the Netherlands' electricity mix compared to the UK, despite having a similar number of sunny days, i.e. probably not very many. So are we making the most of our sunshine? Ella, what do you think? Could we be doing more as far as solar is concerned, do you think?
Absolutely. You just have to look at the statistics and how much we're lagging behind to make that judgment, I would say. I think the discussion around kind of switching from gas to renewables instead of taking coal out of our electricity mix just highlights that problem. We need to make a transition away from fossil fuels. We need to do it very, very fast. And it seems a bit of a missed opportunity to not be rolling out these kinds of proven technologies that we have already at our fingertips.
But Mike, we are rolling out the proven technology of wind power, aren't we? I mean, we compared to our competitors, or not our competitors, our neighbours, I should say, on the continent, we probably do much more as far as wind power is concerned. Do we need to worry about solar as well?
Well, we need to press all the buttons as hard as we can. It's got to be a rapid transition. Yes, it's true we're doing a bit better on wind compared to other countries, in relation to our solar. But it's also true to say we could do a lot better with our solar. So, even if you just look at rooftop solar, it's such a shame when you see a new house built and it's got a south-facing roof and only half of that roof is filled with solar panels. What was wrong with the other half? There are some simple things we could do much better on solar. It's also true to say that for the UK, actually, the balance of renewables between wind and solar is going to be somewhat different than for other countries. So if you compare us to Australia, we have only 1/200th of the sunlight per person compared to Australia, but we've got really good wind. So there is a case for a bit more wind compared to solar relative to some other countries, but still we could be pressing the button harder on solar power, and we absolutely should, despite the pressure on land that we've got as a sort of quite densely populated country with not brilliant sunlight compared to some others. We could still do a lot more.
And Ella, how should that happen? Is this about more subsidies to encourage people to put solar panels on their roof?
I think, there should be some kind of incentive to make it easy. I'm not a complete expert when it comes to the policy and energy particularly, but it should be something that could be accessible for most people. And I think also for landlords to be incentivized to put solar panels on their roofs, for councils to put it on their social housing, as well as relying on homeowners to actually see the benefits of themselves and put them on their roofs. I think it has to be kind of a blanket across the whole of society to incentivize the rapid deployment of solar technologies.
OK, well, we must leave it there. Dr. Ella Gilbert, Mike Berners-Lee, always fascinating to get your take on things. Thanks very much indeed. So that's it from today. But tomorrow I'll be joined by Fatima Ibrahim from the Green New Deal UK and co-founder of Global Optimism, Tom Rivett-Carnac. But for now, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.